Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead, and welcome to episode 159, The Productive Sabbatical. In this episode, I'm actually going to talk about two different things. One is just some general observations and tips about sabbaticals in general. This semester, I'm actually embarking on my third sabbatical, but I know from past experience what has worked and what hasn't worked well with the other two that I've had. And then the second part of what I'm talking about today is a series that we will have as sort of a bonus podcast episode series while I'm on sabbatical. So I'll make some bonus episodes about what's been happening, what I'm working on, and a little bit more real-time insight into what makes these productive or not. And I should say, a third thing that I want to put on your radar is that we do have a topic for our February free webinar, and that topic will also be focused on sabbaticals. So we'll have a link in the show notes, but we've had a number of clients coming to us with questions about how to use these effectively, and especially because they're becoming a little bit more precious for people that don't get them very often. So I wanted to make sure that I had a quick, kind of a quick podcast episode, but a deeper dive look through these bonus episodes and also through our free February webinar. So for today, I want to talk about just a couple of things about the sabbatical in general and just some things that I know just from past experience have worked to help make sure that the process is a good one. For most of the faculty that we're working with at Defend, Publish, and Lead, nearly everyone only has one semester. There are a few faculty that will have a year of research leave or something like that work with us, but it's becoming more and more common that many people only have a semester. So just the fall and then maybe some, summer before that, and same thing, just spring and then some summer after that. So it doesn't really leave a whole lot of time to do some of these really big and important projects that we might be thinking about. That said, we can actually get a lot of work done on these, kind of very wonderful leaves from teaching and administrative service and things like that. So here's a couple of things that if you're going on a sabbatical, you're thinking about having one, or you're in one right now and you're trying to make it work. One of the things that I know that I've been thinking about, and I'll share more live episodes or live observations in those bonus podcast episodes, but a couple of things that I know this time around that I did differently that I'm very glad I did is that I started thinking about what I wanted to do on a sabbatical about a year before I took this one. I knew that my institution typically grants them every 7 years, and I've been here for a long time, so I've taken two so far. And so I know from past experience, the first time that I had one, I had sort of a general idea what I wanted to work on. I knew I was going to be a visiting scholar at another institution, and I had a project in mind. But beyond that, I hadn't really thought about, well, how am I going to use these, wonderfully open weeks without having other obligations? I hadn't really thought about the time and how to make sure that I was using it well. The second sabbatical that I did, that one was more of a research-oriented trip where I was traveling. And so for that one, I know that I had to think about, well, what weeks are travel weeks, what weeks are more research weeks where I'm maybe not doing as much writing because I'm collecting data. In that case, I was working in an archive at the Harvard Center for Hellenic Studies in Washington, D.C. And so there, I only had a few days to be in the archive at a time. And so I wasn't writing up any of my findings while I was in there because I had sort of a limited amount of time I could be in there. And so I know this time around, I really started thinking about not just the project I wanted to work on, but also a little bit more about what I wanted that time to look like. Particularly now with, certainly both sabbatical, well, I shouldn't say that. My first sabbatical, I should say this again. My first sabbatical, I was pregnant during the first one. I found out kind of after I already had agreed to go on leave, and, that worked out fine. Then I was a little bit more free to go to, maternity appointments and things like that. So that just sort of lined up that way. I mean, obviously, pregnancy did take away from some of that sabbatical time. And I know I've had some academic mothers ask more specific questions about that. So I can say more about that in some of the bonus episodes, but also in our free webinar about that. But I know that that was one time where timing kind of wasn't my own on a couple of things. Like I knew that I had to, make sure I was at a doctor's appointment weekly away from the institution where I was doing my first visiting professor position. So, for me, I had to think about schedule in a different way. When I was doing the research project, I had something that looks, I think, a little bit more like a traditional sabbatical. So that was my second one. And that one, I know I was able to kind of think through the project that I wanted to work on, go ahead and collect archival data, come back and work for a couple of weeks, go back and collect archival data again, and so on. And so that one looked a little bit more traditional with sort of the mix of research, reading, and writing all at the same time. But this third time around, I knew that I had a couple of different things happening. So I do have one bigger project that I'm working on. I mentioned I've been working on a book about academic project management. So I'm going to continue that on the sabbatical. But the other thing that I knew I wanted to do, and I had to really think about this about a year in advance, was I knew I wanted to take advantage of a visiting position somewhere. So this time for the third sabbatical, I will be a visiting scholar in project narrative at Ohio State University. And so for me, I kind of knew that's what I wanted to do. I kind of knew that the project I wanted to work on, specifically using the benefit of being there, was to do something that was narrative in nature. That's one of the reasons why I applied to do a project there. And so for that, I'm working on a research article about how faculty talk about their faculty writing processes. How do they write for publication? How do they describe their project management strategies and so on? And I knew I wanted to have a narrative bent to that. And that was the research lens that I wanted to look through. So about a year ahead of time, I, looked at what I needed to do to apply to be able to do that. I needed to look at my deadlines for applying to get a sabbatical. And so what has happened from that point on will be a little bit a part of these bonus sabbatical episodes if you're interested in hearing, kind of how I'm making use of the time. But as a big picture look, one of the things that I chose to do that I didn't do in the past other two that I think was really worth it was the very first week of the sabbatical. Rather than immediately diving into research and writing, I actually did take a full week off. So, something I really haven't done in a very long time, where I took a legitimate week off where I didn't worry about research or writing. I didn't worry about teaching. I didn't worry about service. I didn't worry about any of those things. So I just genuinely took a week off. And instead, what I decided to do was just kind of gather the materials and things that I knew I needed. So that I knew I needed a couple of books. I ordered those. I knew I needed to find a couple of things that I'd been kind of shoving in a digital folder for many, many months. So I did some of that. And that was really the legwork to kind of get me ready for starting a sabbatical. And so I know mine is only 16 weeks. And so I was telling somebody about this, and they said, well, you just threw your first week away. But I would argue I probably didn't, because it took, it actually allowed me to kind of be very methodical in what kinds of things do I need? What kinds of things do I need in the 16 weeks? So if you're somebody that's thinking about doing this, I think this is a really good point to ask yourself a question about not only what is it that you want to produce during the sabbatical, which I think is always the question that gets asked and posed, but more so, how do you want to use the time? What is the thing that's the overarching driver of your sabbatical? A lot of people will say, well, I need the publication at the end of it. But to me, there's other things embedded in that. So one of the things I knew that was going to be a bigger driver for me was that I would have these longer periods of time to write. So I know I've talked on the podcast lots of times about my writing habits and how I try to do 2 hours in a stretch, 5 days a week, no weekends, no nights. Just during the workday, I try to get in 2 hours. And a lot of times it doesn't happen. So I always shoot for a range of like 8 to 12 hours. And I try not to ever do any fewer than 8 in a week. But I knew that this kind of schedule where, yes, I'm doing this, this work and this project narrative, I still have a pretty open schedule. I get to go to some talks. I get to talk with faculty. Pretty much my time is my own. And so I have not really experimented a whole lot with, well, what happens when I have more than 2 hours in a day? I haven't had that in a very, very long time. So for me, one of the things that's more of an overarching goal for this particular sabbatical is to really pay attention to my own writing habits and what allows me to get more work done. Can I do a 6-hour writing stint in a day? I don't know. I haven't tried it in a really long time. I have pulled, of course, all-nighters. At some point I think I have an episode maybe about binge writing somewhere, and I know I probably need to say something about that again, because I am not above an all-nighter to get something met for a deadline. I've done it somewhat recently. It gets harder as I get older, for sure, but I still do it. So I'm not talking about that kind of thing. I'm talking about more of a deliberate, like, I know I have this big stretch of writing. How can I get a lot of writing completed in one day? So for me, that's one of the things that's going to be a goal, not just that I study faculty writing, but I really want to know, like, what am I capable of doing with my work habits? And for anybody that's able to do this on a sabbatical, I think it's really worth it, because if we think about it, the sabbatical is supposed to be your ideal working conditions. No distractions, no, university obligations and all that. And that may not be true. Like, I'm still doing a few administrative things that I'm not able to let go. Um, but I know for me, I really do want to know what are some of the optimal working conditions. So while yes, I need to use the sabbatical to get some work done, I'm also interested in paying attention to how I'm getting it done. So I'm not allowing myself to be sort of like, oh, you wasted a Monday. Oh no, now you only have, 58 days left, or I don't even know how many days it is in the sabbatical. Like, I don't want to think of it as a ticker or a countdown. So instead, I'm just deciding I'm going to be very, very like slow and calm about what it is I'm working on, and let's just see and find out what's happening. So the episodes that will be in here as bonuses, I'll try to make them pretty short, but just they're really going to be kind of like a week by week look at what I've been up to on the sabbatical, and what kind of writing I'm getting done, how much is kind of possible, what's not possible, what are some things I'm thinking about as it goes forward. And I really wanted to do this because I know for me, I know lots of people that have taken sabbaticals, and some of them are going to really cool research locations, or they've got these really fun projects that they're working on, and they go to yoga and hang out and do all these really cool things. So I did work in some fun things for me too during the sabbatical. But beyond that, like we see the products that they produce, but we don't understand really how they're producing those in that time that's available to them. So that's one of the things I'll be focusing on in the sabbatical series. And then if you want to join us for our February webinar, that one will be our free webinar. There'll be a link in the show notes to that. And why you would want to attend something like that would be some general really good practices for setting up the sabbatical. What to do if something happens or you get derailed. In my case, our pregnancy was a very happy event, but it also, especially towards the end of that sabbatical, took a good deal of time away from time I was able to travel and do some other things. So I had to kind of adjust to think about how I was going to use that time. So hopefully this gives you some things to think about. And of course, if you have any questions about sabbaticals that you want us to work into covering in that free February webinar, please don't hesitate to email me at Christine@defendpublishedlead.com. We're also very happy to do consultations. So if you haven't booked a free half-hour consultation with us, if you go to our website, it's just defendpublishedlead.com. If you go there and you click a link to a free consultation, we're happy to chat with you for 30 minutes and kind of think through some of the things you might be having on a sabbatical or a research leave, or even a summer. So a lot of people use summers as sort of mini sabbaticals. If you're not teaching and you're able to pull off a little bit more research in the summer, this would be another way that you might be able to use this information. Happy writing this week.